The basic thing to keep in mind here is that I have spaced all of these out. You'll notice that I just used 10 frame increments for this project. If I had 50 decision points, I might not want to use 10 frame, I might use 5 frame increments, but I did that so that I could read the text in my labels layer. Now, a label is simply on a keyframe. I go into my properties and I can put a label on it. See where it says name? So I typed in friends right there. I can go over to Mary. Click on this frame. There's the label. Now, when I look at my timeline, suddenly it's a whole lot more understandable because I can now read what each section of this timeline is. I'm not left wondering, what's that keyframe? What's that keyframe? If we go and look at, say, this project here, the demo project that we just looked at, there's a bunch of labels, but they're all stacked so tightly it makes it really hard to figure out what is what. So my advice is use labels, but also then space them out so you can read what the label says, so it gives you a much easier to understand visual. So then your timeline becomes human readable instead of a series of dots and tweens and keyframes that you're left going, what is at this point? So I would encourage you to do that. Now, I have buttons on multiple frames, but I only have code in the first frame. So my buttons have instance names on them, friends button, Mary button as an underscore BTN, that's shorthand for button. But by naming my buttons in that manner, I'm going to be able to read the code that I create a little bit easier, which is what we're going to look at next. So a question came up this morning about these import statements at the top of the code. When you're handed ready-baked code that's ready for you to start working with, just use it, tweak what needs to be tweaked, delete something if you want to. If it breaks, go back and undo that deletion and then leave it there and go, apparently I needed that to make it function. I didn't type in a single one of these import statements. It put them in for me. And the project will actually work with if I got rid of all but the one that is currently highlighted. I do need that particular one highlighted. Now, before we get fully into this, I forgot there's a few other parts I need to explain on this project, namely about the video playback object here. So the code that you are being provided requires you to use a different version when you publish, not to publish in the most current version of 10.2, but instead to publish at version 9. So if I have a new file, I need to change my publish setting to 9. Otherwise, you'll get an error message. So if you're going to use this code for doing the video, if you're going to use the code for doing the buttons and you don't have video in your project, then you can leave it and it will function just fine. But the video part does require you to lower it to Flash Player 9. Now, one comment on that is Flash Player 9 isn't a bad thing. It's AS3 and it does a bunch of really good things. All they've done is add in more and more features into Flash Players 10 and 10.2. But it's still the same thing. It still performs the same within reason. I mean, 10.2 can do some newer things, but for the purposes of everything you'd be doing, Flash Player 9 has an added advantage that it's installed on more computers than Flash Player 10, so that would make that an even better option in that regard. Next, the component to be able to play video is under Components, which is here on the side, otherwise under Window, Components. And if we look in here, we'll see that there is Flex User Interface and Video. So I'm going to go and choose Video. I choose FLV Playback, and I pull that out onto my stage. There is my FLV Playback component. We can see it says FLV Playback version 2.1.0.23. Looks like a little video player. Has some controls on the bottom. these features of this are adjustable. So the controls that I can see here are a skin on this video player. And I can modify that by going under properties of this instance of my FLV playback component, and I can modify the skin. So I can click on that and now click here, and I can see I have options to quite a few skins. You can even make your own skin if you're so motivated. But if we look at the skins, we will see that they are minimal, then skin over and skin under. Currently I'm using skin under, showing every possible button. If I wanted skin under play, I could choose that, and we can see all we do is get a play button. If I choose skin over play, now it sits on top, and if I want it to be not red but alien blood green, I can choose that. There it is. And when this is running, once I hit play and move my mouse off it, the control bar will disappear. It fades out. So it's much like the controls on YouTube and Vimeo and things like that, where the controls are over the top, but they disappear once you stop moving your mouse and move it off of the control bar area. Under the properties here, I can deselect autoplay, so it requires me to have to hit the button to make it play, but there's nothing to play here yet. And I haven't defined a source. Now it's really important before you put playback components inside a project that you define or you save the file in the same folder where the video files are going to be. So I'm going to save this as a demo. Whoop. So save it as demo. I'm going to put it in my there. So now I've saved it. Go back to this. Now if I look for the source, I can browse inside that folder. And there it is. And I can even preview it directly in Flash. I didn't even hit Command Enter or anything. All I did was click on this play button.
I'm better. Nice to meet you. I just want,
And auto hide on the skin. See how it fades? Shows up, fades.
Nice to meet you.
So apparently this is the nice guy one. We can see there's the path for the video. If I want to change skins, I can click here, go and choose something else. I could choose skin under, skin over all, so we can see all of the controls.
I just want, I'm kind of looking for a girl who could be as nice as I am,
You need to be in the web browser to get the full screen to work properly. Mute. You can scrub it. So it's a fairly powerful video playback component. The video playback component supports captioning, it supports cue points. It's very robust in what it can do. So it is something that you definitely, if you're going to be including video on a project, it's possible to hand code kind of integration of video into a project, but there's almost never a reason, unless you're a masochist, to do that when you have access to the playback component. So you're highly recommended to utilize the video playback component if video is going to be part of a project. So once again, to get video into it, go to Components, drag it out, then you can define your source. I'm not going to have it match. We'll put it there, blah, blah, blah. Now, another thing to keep in mind with this, the video is not, if we look in my library, the video is not in my library. I'm linking to it. That's really important to keep in mind. The video is being linked to. Also remember, we're going to lower the publish settings to 9.
Roxanne, You don't have to put on a red light.
Yeah, he was a very interesting talent who did some very questionable practices with our poor mannequin, who has gone to a better place now. She's fallen down one too many times, and her neck is not able to be repaired anymore. Okay. So going back to the main project here, if you notice in the timeline, the video is everywhere. You can turn it off so you can see the buttons. So what I am doing is I'm controlling the visible property of that video object. Objects have properties. They have properties of X, Y, scale X, scale Y, scale Z. They have rotation properties. They have alpha properties and visible. Visible has two states, true or false. When the visible is false, the object disappears. When the visible is true, we can see the object. That's how visible works. Now I'm going to turn it back on for a moment, click on it, and we'll see that the name of this playback component, its instance name is vid, because I'm too lazy to write video. So I went with vid. It works for me. You can use more complete names if you want while you're doing your coding. Do what works for you. Now I'm going to hide that. I need to pull this down a little bit because we'll need some more room on screen in a moment. And if I go to the code, so here's the code. So what it does is it says the video source is nothing. Video do not start playing. Video visible false, as in go away, I don't want to see you. Then it tells my movie to stop so that it doesn't start playing. Then I tell my entire project, stage add event listener mouse event click, and then call the function click handler when something has been clicked. Remember, Flash is an event-based language. It wants events to happen. When they do, it calls those functions or verbs. A function is a verb. Think of it in that sense. Now, the click handler function, and I really do recommend that you can type things in directly, but it's a whole lot faster to copy, paste, and change the particulars. That's what I would recommend doing, especially when you're just learning. It's kind of what Adobe's vision was on using snippets. You use the snippet and then you change the details, but it gives you that basic code. You don't have to fully understand what you're doing. Most people learn how to do scripting and programming not by understanding it completely before they ever write a line of code. You start with an existing piece of code, paste it in, change some details, and if it doesn't break, you call it a success. If it does break, then you try to backtrack what you changed that caused it to break. So within this function, I am checking. I'm finding out, did I target the stage when I clicked? So if I click on the stage, the white area here, that's the stage. So if I clicked on that stage, then I don't want anything to happen. I only want things to happen when I click on the object itself. So when I look at the code, it says, so if the target of my click is not equal to the stage, a common programming convention is to use exclamation mark equal sign for saying not equal to. That's a very standard way of writing an inequality, not equal. Now, then what I'm doing is I'm using what's called a switch statement, which is a shorthand way of writing if something, else if something, else if something, else if something, else if something else. The problem with if-else statements or if-else-if statements is you end up with tons of curly braces, and it gets hard to figure out what is what because of how things indent and stuff, that it's much easier, in my opinion, to use a switch statement, which is doing the exact same thing as an if-else-if statement. So I'm saying if this is true, else if this is true, else if this is true, and when I finally find one that's true, then I do whatever follows after that. So, is the name of the button I clicked on Friends button? If so, it's going to tell me a message. It's going to trace out a message to me. Trace statements are a way to make your program send you information so that you know it's working. If you delete all trace statements, your code will work perfectly. When you publish your project and put it on the web or in an app or wherever you put it, trace statements will not output. They only output when you're in Flash itself. So you don't have to worry about them being like, oh, I can't use them or I have to go and delete them all. They automatically get deleted when you compile it and play it outside of Flash. We're going to skip Friends for a moment and go if I click on one of the other buttons. So if I click on Try Again, it traces out a message, Try Again. And then it tells my project go to and stop. And instead of a number, it's telling me a frame label. The same labels we have down at the bottom. So I hope you can see how much more readable the code is when you use frame labels versus numbers. Because if you look at your code and all you do is have numbers, you're like, crap, I don't know what number that corresponds to. But if you're referencing a label, your code makes sense. It becomes more human readable. And I think that's really helpful for being better at putting together a project when you can read the code without having to go, look at the code, look at the timeline, look at the code, look at the timeline and make sense, or have a cheat sheet where you say, okay, at this frame is going to be this section, this frame number is this section, this frame number is that section. And you have a whole cheat sheet that you have to use to look at your code to make sense out of it. That's a waste of time. Labels make life much easier. Now, the syntax for a switch statement is case, the item that you want to know if that's true, then you put a colon, then you say what's going to happen, and then you end it with a break. What that does with the break is if this is true, it stops and doesn't go through the rest of it. Everything else above this, if that's true, everything else above it must have been false. I hit that break and now I'm out of the switch statement and go on to do whatever's next. That's the basics of how that particular thing works. Case, the thing you want to be true, the verbs or the actions you want to occur, then you put a break. That's it. Again, copy paste all the code, change the details, and you'll be a happy camper. Now if you notice, I could add 50 more buttons here and all my code would be in one place. So when it comes time to adjust my project, correct my project, debug my project, modify my project, one-stop shopping so I don't have to keep clicking out in the timeline. And as you found on your animation projects, when you get to frame 500, 1,000, 1,500, then back to frame 200, it gets to be a pain going back and forth and back and forth. And if you've named all your instances, you can just type all your code in one place and be done. And it's a much happier time. So I would highly encourage you to use this, but the methods we've looked at prior, completely valid and will still work. So you don't have to abandon it, but you may wish to adopt this because it can be cleaner. So if you remember, we told the video, had no source, don't play, said it's visible to false, made it go away. If I click on the Friends button, then it makes the video become visible so I can see the video player again. It tells the video what video to load. It says seek 0. What that does is that rewinds the video to guarantee that when I go to that frame, the video is indeed playing from frame 1. So it doesn't start in the middle. So if somehow the video ended and then I go back to it again, the video is still ended. So I have to at some point tell it to rewind. So I tell it seek 0, which is go back to the beginning. Then I tell the video to play, and I tell the timeline go to that frame label. Notice the labels are in quotation marks, where when we use numbers, we did not put numbers in quotation marks because we could refer to a number as a number. Finally, I need to tell my video to listen for being done. Because otherwise the video will just stop, and I could have a button there the whole time that I could click on to go on and just skip the video halfway through, and I'd miss out on all that cheesy pickup line. And that's just no fun, because it's more fun to watch the cheese. So when the video is done, I'm now comparing, is the current label I am on, when it's friends, make the video go away, and then I say go to and stop friends end. Down here. If I was watching the Mary video, so I was here, it goes to Mary end. So it goes, watch the video, and then when it's done, it goes to Mary end, and I get to see those options. So when the video is done, it listens for that complete. When the video is complete, it has reached its end. Then that will fire off and call this function, checks what label I'm on. If I'm on friends, it goes here. If I'm on Mary, go here. If I had 10 more videos, I would have 10 more cases. So if we watch it, let's decide that we can Mary. Traced out a message here.
Hey, I seen you and you're stunningly beautiful. My name's Ben. Would you marry me? Please? Marry me? Please?
And then we can decide that, no, she wasn't working out and we can run away. And that's it. Now I could put a button here, go back and do something else, etc. But now I have a basic interactive. I have video that plays. And then I get to decide what I want to do. And it will bring me to appropriate endings.